This is TVP World. You're watching News in Depth, where we discuss some of the more topical articles of the news cycle. Now, as the EU prepares its 19th package of sanctions against Russia, targeting crypto, banks, and fossil fuels, calls are growing to accelerate the phase-out of Russian energy imports, funding the war in Ukraine. At the same time, Poland's push for World War II reparations from Germany has returned to the spotlight following President Nawrocki's trip to Berlin. Joining us today on TVP World to assess these overlapping fronts is Adam Jasser, our Deputy Director for News and a seasoned observer of European policy and political strategy. Hello and welcome.
Hello, thank you.
So we are taking a look at, the 19th package of sanction, and we have a soundbite. Let's take a look at it first, and we'll see you on the other end. Do we have that ready? All right, in the meantime, let's take a look at why it takes Europe so long, because energy have always been a weak point for Europe's sanctions against Russia. And why has it taken this long to get serious about the full phase-out of Russian energy?
Well, Europe's dependence on Russian deliveries has been going on and deepening for so many years that you cannot just abruptly stop it without causing huge economic damage. But some countries, such as Poland, even Germany to some extent, managed to wean themselves off Russian gas and oil. But some other countries, such as Hungary and Slovakia, insist that they cannot afford to do this. So, some European countries are basically dragging their feet, blocking the majority in the European Union from doing so. So now, obviously, some countries, such as Poland, want to speed up the process. The Commission wants to, the European Commission, the executive, wants to speed up the process. Some countries are opposing it. But now the paradox is that Donald Trump is suddenly asking Europe to speed up this process of not importing Russian oil. So the interesting paradox here is that Hungary and Slovakia are supportive of Russia. They're also at the same time a little closer to Donald Trump than some other European nations, and they're the main obstacle.
Right, so they seem to be trapped in a double bind there. And we also have a statement from the Slovakian economic minister actually talking about just that and how difficult it is to phase out Russian energy. So if we have that, let's take a look.
Before we can fully commit, we need to have the right conditions in place. Otherwise, we risk seriously damaging our industry and economy.
Do you think these are valid concerns, seeing that the European Union have been working with Hungary and Slovakia to try to find ways to diversify, but they seem to be quite insistent on...
Look. You have Czech Republic, which is as landlocked as Hungary and Slovakia. You have Poland that relied on Russian oil for decades. And all these countries managed to diversify. Hungary and even Austria did that in the end. It's only Hungary and Slovakia who insist, it's such a problem. They've known it for 3 years now, and what have they done? Very little.
And even back when the 10th...
They just bet on the wrong horse. They just assume that the Trump administration will come in, the war will end, as Donald Trump promised, and business as usual will return. And now they're finding out that, oops, that scenario doesn't work.
Right, even back, I remember the 10th sanction package was being discussed. There's already kind of guardrails the European Union is trying to put in place to make sure that there's energy diversification. Now, Poland is actually one of the countries that does have a strong position when it comes to diversifying its energy. And do you think that it can help push the EU towards faster and more enforceable energy decoupling?
Well, alone Poland isn't going to do that. But again, I mean, we've said it already. The majority of the EU countries are ready to move on. And of course, it's part of a wider picture because it's also an attempt to keep Donald Trump engaged in Europe's plan and security for Ukraine. So if he's demanding it, in a sense, it makes it easier for the Commission to push Hungary, Slovakia, and perhaps some other countries. I mean, when it comes to LNG imports, so liquid gas, some other European countries are importing quite significant amounts of Russian gas. So it's one. And then the other element of this is that the Commission is the European Union is asked by Trump to put pressure on India and China as countries that keep buying Russian oil as well, to put sanctions or tariffs. So there seems to be, again, some kind of convergence. Maybe they don't see eye to eye, Trump and the Europeans, but we had that call yesterday between him and Ursula von der Leyen. And it's moving in the same direction. And so for Europeans, I think the essential part is, as long as it moves in the same direction as the US, give and take, and given Mr. Trump's unpredictability, that can be sometimes hard to maintain, then Trump acts as a catalyst of perhaps faster action. And we've seen it before with defense, right? I mean, the European NATO members for years resisted higher spending on
Really
defense,
don't want
right?
to go to that 2%.
Yeah, they didn't want to go to 2%, then they were talking, oh, maybe one day to 3%, and suddenly everybody says 5%, fine. So, you know, in some sense, in this sense, you could even argue that Trump is effective.
And speaking of the European Commission, we do finally have the statement from Ursula von der Leyen, so let's take a look.
I had a good call with the President of the United States on strengthening our joint efforts to increase economic pressure on Russia through additional measures. The Commission will soon present its 19th package of sanctions targeting crypto, banks, and energy. Russia's war economy, sustained by revenues from fossil fuels, is financing the bloodshed in Ukraine. To put an end to it, the Commission will propose speeding up the phase-out of Russian fossil imports.
Right, so this is what we just discussed.
Exactly, and like you mentioned earlier, Trump seems to be, in his own way, sort of effective in pushing these type of change, but there are also some criticism coming at the President of the United States saying that, well, his deadline to essentially sanction Russia has been kind of violated again and again. Do you think that it's fair to say perhaps trying to kind of point at the European Union is also some way to alleviate the pressure on the United States to have to carry out the secondary sanction that he's been threatening?
I wouldn't put it better myself. You're absolutely right. You know, in a sense, Trump is deflecting the pressure on himself that he's not delivering sanctions, but saying, but Europeans should do more, and then I'll do more. But again, as long as it moves in the same direction, this is all right.
Right, so it sounds like a little bit turbulence when it comes to coordination, but as long as we are looking at the same target of phasing out Russian energy eventually, well, it is moving in the direction that we're looking at right now. Thank you so much for that. And now I want to move on to the second topic because, well, the topic of German reparation to Poland has been brought back to light again, and we have some statement made by the Polish president. So let's take a look at that. In the meantime, while they're searching for the article,
for our common future, for the security of our alliances, we are waiting for reparations from the German state.
And, well, unfortunately, it does not seem like he's come back with any sort of promise or, well, anything really substantial. How would you rate this trip, and do you think that it serves any sort of purpose that the Polish president has set out to do?
You're referring to his visit in Berlin,
yes.
Yesterday, because we haven't mentioned that yet, that he was there. So this was his first trip to Western Europe. He went to the States before.
Right.
So he went to Berlin, and he raised the issue of reparations. And, you know, it was predictable that he will come back empty-handed because the Germans issued a statement saying, you know, we consider the issue closed, which is, you know, regrettable in some sense because Poland wasn't treated unfairly at the end of the war. The Germans caused enormous destruction and you know, millions of Poles were killed, and you know, so Poland suffered a lot, and the compensation it received at the end of the Second World War for different reasons, and this is where things get tricky, was probably not fair. But the problem with this is that some facts are unforgiving here. And so let's take a look at the basic facts. The size of German reparations for Poland that Mr. Nawrocki is now equating to the claim for actual reparations. He's asking for $1.2 trillion. Okay. Now, at the end of the World War II, when reparations were set by the victorious allies, and basically this meant the UK, the US, and the Soviet Union, Russia, they agreed on reparations that Germany would have to pay to all the allies at 20 billion US dollars. In today's terms, we're talking about close to 400 billion. Sure. 400 billion. And Poland is asking Germany now, 80 years after the war, to pay 1.2 trillion, so 3 times as much as all the allies received. So, obviously this is a non-starter for any kind of serious negotiation. And another fact to bring up is that, Mr. Nawrocki is the third right-wing president in Poland now, in the past 20 years, who has made this a central point of his agenda, getting reparations from Germany. And 20 years later, we're exactly where we were before. Nothing happened. So it's just not successful, this strategy. Mm-hmm. Lech Kaczyński tried that. Mr. Duda, Mr. Nawrocki's predecessor, tried that. Nothing happened. So the question now that it comes up is that, apart from the fact that historically this is unfair, and yes, Poles have the right to feel that they were wronged, the question is, are you successful in this strategy? What benefits do you get from keeping hitting the wall with your head when there are other challenges, such as security, where cooperation with Berlin and Germany is obviously important, as the events of the last week illustrate?
All right, so there's like I mentioned, there's a lot of aspect that Poland and Germany should be cooperating on, but in the president's argument is that in order to come to any sort of, working in tandem, they should also kind of mend over these historical issues. You mentioned the fact that...
Yeah, but he makes it sound as if it was in Germany's interest to get Germany to cooperate with Poland. Yes, you can make that argument, but obviously Poland is the country which is now exposed to Russian aggression more than Germany, right? So, and Poland, relative to its size and the size of its economy, Poland needs to be part of the sort of deciding force inside the European Union about how to proceed with security with Russia, with Ukraine. And for a moment it seemed Poland was part of this format that really makes decisions in the EU. But Mr. Nawrocki is saying, no. Before we settle historical issues, we're not going to cooperate with you. It cannot work. The only effect this can have is that Poland is going to be seen as sort of ambiguous player in all of this. So I can't see the benefit for Poland from such behavior. And interestingly, historical issues for Mr. Nawrocki also dominate his discussion with Ukraine, right? And interestingly, he doesn't mention Russia at all. It was the Soviets who deprived Poland of much of the reparations paid out by Germany after the Second World War, because the Soviets were distributing those reparations among its satellite nations. And no one makes any claim against Russia. Russia invaded, today is actually the anniversary of Russian invasion on Poland in 1939. Because let's remember, Russia invaded Poland in cahoots with Germany. Russia committed atrocities. Russia destroyed Poland's intelligentsia officers in Katyn. Nobody makes any reparations claims against the Soviet Union. So, in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that by dwelling on these historical issues, there is a risk that the Polish establishment, Polish officials, lose sight of national interest priorities now, which are security, Russia, Ukraine.
Is there an argument to be made that the longer this doesn't get addressed, if they do want to get any reparations, that letting this fester, there would be a point where that ship has sailed and is no longer kind of feasible to bring up to the table?
I think there is one possibility which we haven't yet discussed, that in fact President Nawrocki, as well as some other more nationalist-leaning politicians in Poland, realize that this issue is effectively closed, but they're using it for purely domestic political ends to mobilize the more nationalist right-wing voters, and the fact that they keep promising this for 20 years and nothing came out of it doesn't seem to bother them much.
Well, if this is seen as something of a more political move, is there an argument to be made that this is actually quite politically risky? Like you mentioned, nothing really came out of it without 3 different presidents so far. Wouldn't that actually be a political risk instead, having not gotten a win on this very polarizing issue?
But, you know, today's politics, not just in Poland, but in many countries in the United States, in Britain, we see it during Donald Trump's visit, we see it in the United States, even in recent days, that polarization, that there are politicians who thrive on polarization. So polarization may not necessarily bring any results, doesn't deliver policies or improvement in people's lives, but mobilizes the base. And I think here we're talking about mobilizing the base of support for Mr. Nawrocki. And let's remember that he used anti-German rhetoric during his presidential campaign, which he won by a whisker. But nevertheless, he won it. He was the underdog. And perhaps also thanks to this tough stance on Germany, maybe this is why he delivered in the end a victory. So now he's sticking to his guns, which you can understand in political terms. But again, the question of whether that is positive for Poland's national interest is an open question.
Right, then for his political purpose then, do you think that that is how his voter base is going to look at it? Or do you think that this might be effective in, scoring him more political
I think
points?
opinion polls indicate that anti-German sentiment is surging. And I think part of it is the result of consistent anti-German propaganda and anti-German narratives from both the far right, but also, unfortunately, from the sort of more moderate right wing. So we see that it's actually traveling with significant parts of the electorate. And there's a paradox there because, you know, as we discussed many times here, you know, Poland and Germany have a number of common interests. And particularly now when Germany abandoned this rather irresponsible attachment to Russian energy, actually when it comes to policy issues, Ukraine, defense, many other areas, Poland and Germany share very similar policy objectives. So why jeopardize this through an issue which is historical and which seems not to be moving ahead at all?
All right, thanks for wrapping all of this up. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your input and insight. And thanks again for being with us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you for tuning into this edition of News in Depth. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.